Hello, hello. Welcome to the Baby Castle stream. Twitch.tv/babycastles. Got my funky background royalty-free music playing here. Shout out to William Rosati, Head Candy. Royalty-free doesn't mean acknowledgement-free. At least not on this stream. Hey, thanks for the follow there, Lucas on the internet. Sklim M, welcome to Baby Castles. Give I'll vamp here for a second while people are rolling in. But yeah, hope you're all here for the book launch event for Anna Valens' Tumblr porn from Instar Books. We've got a great panel and reading and Q&A coming up. And won't want to miss it. We're also joined this evening by Gretchen Felker-Martin, joining Anna on a panel. And we've got our publishers of Instar Books, Gene Thornton and Miracle Jones, here this evening. I'll be turning things over to them in a second. How much more funky time do I have? Oh, I've got about 40 seconds. 40 whole seconds of funky time with Todd. I'm Todd Anderson. Maybe I should have said that just to start. And you're here on the Baby Castle stream. Baby Castles is a DIY games and digital art space in New York City. We've been running our events online for the past year. But we're happy to host all kinds of different events. We've been hosting book launches for Instar Books for many years now. Happy to do so online. You can follow and subscribe to the Baby Castles Twitch stream to catch our future events, or if you're interested in subscribing to Baby Castles, maybe becoming a member, you can find us on With Friends. I'm gonna get that link for you real quick. withfriends.co/babycastles/join. Oh, hey, Tom with an I. Welcome. Here's a little link where you can join Baby Castles. We've got lots of cool events. We've got workshops every Sunday. We have co-working with other game developers, digital makers on Monday nights. And we've got lots of great events on this stream. But speaking of great events, we've got one for you this evening. And for this one, I'm going to turn you over to our main MCs and panels. So please give it up here in the chat for Gene Thornton, Miracle Jones, Gretchen, and Anna. Let's give it up. Let's see those claps in the chat. Clap, 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 clap. Oh yeah.
Wow. I can't see anything that's going on because I'm not on the Twitch stream, so it's like a really beautiful radio.
You're on the Twitch stream. You're live.
Is Funky Time over now?
Oh, Funky Time is way over.
Oh, I love Funky
Time's
Time. Big
So
fan of Funky Time.
Is it the hour to introduce the series and the event?
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh my God. Okay. Hello, everyone. I cannot see. My name is Gene Thornton. I'm one of the publishers of Instar Books. Looking at Miracle Jones, one of the other publishers of Instar Books, who's...
Oh yeah, Miracle Jones here, your other friendly publisher of Instar.
Basically, we're here to introduce this launch event for the first book in the Remember the Internet series called Tumblr Porn. I will hold it up here for you all.
My precious baby.
And of
Oh
course,
my God.
we'll be dropping some links in the chat throughout the night for how you can get this book directly from us, or you can, of course, order it from any bookstore of your liking. Just walk in there and like put your hands on your hips and say in the proudest, biggest voice you can, like, give me Tumblr porn, and every bookstore clerk will know exactly what you mean. You can also request it by author and ISBN and all the normal ways you would do such a thing. Miracle Jones, what do you want to say about Remember the Internet, the series?
Yeah, I can't tell. And, like, especially since the pandemic, like I can't tell if I hate the internet or not, or if I like it somewhat. But I feel like we gotta remember it, right? I feel like we have to solemnify what has happened to all of us, and the this is the first book, and the most important, uh, s because it sets the entire agenda for the series, right? And um, it's the perfect one. This really sort of like typifies the good and the bad, and the dramatic and the banal, and just like everything about the internet that I hate and somewhat like and love and obsess over. And it's fantastic. It's just like it's human drama. Like it's the internet made human, and I can't wait for you all to read it. And I'm so pumped to see what happens with the rest of the series too.
Yeah, totally. Which we can briefly talk about what we have planned for the rest of season one. Thank you to everybody who helped back the Kickstarter for this and make this happen. It was a delight to be able to do this series at last, right? Coming up for you, we're going to have, I believe, Google Glass by journalist Quinn Meyer, MySpace Scene Queens by Noral Sabai, and Tori Amos Bootleg Web Ring, about a Tori Amos bootleg web ring by Megan Milks. Going to be coming throughout the rest of this year and early into next. And then we're, of course, sometime this summer, we are going to start taking submissions officially for season 2 of Remember the Internet. So please, if you have feelings and memories about the internet, a special place in your heart for this place we live, please be preparing that. We would love to hear from you and continue to tell the complete story of the internet one book at a time. So I will turn things over in a moment to our panelists. We're going to have like a quick panel discussion and then followed by Q&A. So please put any questions you have in the chat. If you're unfamiliar with Twitch, please know that you must make an account in order to leave questions. Otherwise, we cannot hear you. I can neither see or hear you myself. I'm not on the Twitch stream, right? So like, whatever you're saying, I don't know, but no one will know unless you make an account. I will begin by saying also that one of our panelists, Dreadful Damsel, was unable to make it tonight, unfortunately. You should absolutely, this is a real shame there's a last minute cancellation. You should absolutely check out her work, which we're going to drop some links in the chat in a bit. She sends her regrets, but it is my distinct honor to introduce to you our 2 panelists who are here, who I'm very, very stoked to hear talk tonight. One is film critic and horror author Gretchen Felker-Martin, and the other is a reporter for the Daily Dot, specializing in adult content and sex worker rights. She is the author behind Tumblr Porn, is a sex worker, an adult game developer, and a watchdog against homophobic and transmisogynistic censorship. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. Please welcome Anna Valens.
Hi, thank you so much for having us and for those wonderful introductions. Real quickly, I want to give a shout out to Baby Castles, to Instar. It feels amazing to I when I first moved to New York about 5 years ago, I remember going to like my first Instar event, and it kind of blows my mind to now be publishing a book with them. So truly supported by an amazing group of people, everyone here, including Gretchen, who's been a fantastic, colleague and coworker in the in the queer world of online writing, which is really, really amazing place. Thank you sincerely to everyone. It's been a really wonderful journey getting this book out from my head into your hands. So thank you. So yes, what I want to do with this little discussion that is going to be between, kind of me and Gretchen, is chat a little bit about the history of the internet, which is kind of, that's something that unfortunately takes a lot more than about an hour to talk about, but to do it the full justice. But really, what the internet was and what it was for a lot of us who like came of age through it and came into our own through it versus where it's headed now and how Tumblr porn kind of plays that history. So a lot of people as quote unquote internet historians have all sorts of different ideas about what the internet is these days and what it started out as, what happened to it. Is it is something dying about it? Is something bad happened? Who knows? I actually want to start, Gretchen. I was wondering, how would you kind of describe internet history? You know, if you had to sit down and say in like a few sentences, like what is the history of the internet? How would you describe it?
That's a tall order.
I know. I like tall orders, so.
But what I would say is that we invented something to connect people, and then predictably we sold it.
I would absolutely agree.
And so you wind up with this thing that briefly, for this flickering moment, allowed the integration of different facets of personal and professional and artistic life. And it just gets taken apart bite by bite and monetized and turned into what we have today, which is a highly corporatized landscape.
Right. It sort of feels like there is the shift that happened, like, especially, you know, a lot of people that I talk to will say like Tumblr banning adult content, you know, getting rid of pornography, and anything that's NSFW based, all things, you know, it's kind of complicated, but technically that's what happened. Was like sort of like the shifting point, but it really feels like it's a little bit unfair to say that like Tumblr banning porn was like when the internet shifted from like this like censorous or like hellscape to like this like free open place to express ourselves. Like I
Right.
feel like it's been something that's gradually been happening and has been getting worse and worse over time too.
I would agree. I think that, you know, the Tumblr ban was a watershed moment, but it was also the culmination of a bunch of other stuff that had happened. You know, there was already copious legislation putting a lot of liability on a lot of different companies based on what was hosted on their sites. We're a country that has a notoriously flimsy and punitive definition of pornography.
Yeah, it's very true. Especially especially sort of like the ways that it intersects with, like, people talk a lot about the relationship between adult content and sex workers' rights, right? And how like adult content creators aren't necessarily sex workers, especially like illustrators and stuff like that, but there absolutely is a lot of ways in which it feels like a lot of the legislature that's made specifically to target sex workers ends up impacting adult creators too.
Absolutely. You know, I know so many erotic artists who have been kicked off of platforms and lost income streams and gone through harassment, and it all ties directly back to the legalistic way that we approach all of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, there's a lot of overlap between those identities too. Like people sometimes say like, oh, sex workers, like you want to distinctly state that like a sex worker is different from an adult content creator, and you don't want to say that adult content creator is necessarily a sex worker. But in my experience, a lot of like adult content creators like dabble in sex work a little bit too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's like this crossover where sort of like the rigid identities that we think of the internet often tend to like melt, and like the complexity of being a person is what comes through.
Right. None of that shit survives contact with reality.
Yeah, right. That's theory in a nutshell, I feel like.
Absolutely. I mean, so many people who make adult content online are enmeshed in that world to an extent that you become effectively unmarketable in any other.
Yeah.
So if you're going to branch out, it's going to be within that little demi-monde, to be a pretentious asshole.
Yeah, no, seriously. I like that word, by the way. That's a word I usually don't get to hear, so it's good to good to see the dictionary get exercised for me. God, I used to use like so many big words like when I was in college, and I'm saying big word here because I actually do not know what that word means. So it's exciting.
Well, demi-monde is like a little world, a shadow world.
Oh, I love that. I'm like totally going to like now use that all the time in all my writing constantly because it's like my exciting new word. Have you ever like had that
Tony
happen?
Soprano after his therapy session. It's a
I love
demi-monde.
that. I love that. This is reminding me that I need to watch The Sopranos. I like how every queer that I know is watching The Sopranos right now. Like we're having a cultural movement.
I did that.
You did that. I'm blaming you.
Yes.
I saw like Chingy was also like watching The Sopranos, and then just like random like leather dicks I know are watching it. It's like Beautiful. I'm like from New Jersey, so like I feel like a lot of pride there. So
Yeah, that's where
Yeah.
my dad comes from too, and boy, howdy, is his family like that.
it really like gets in the water. It's just the nature of being in Jersey.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I'm actually I'm curious a little bit about your relationship with like using Tumblr and social media and stuff as well, Gretchen, because I feel like it, as like you know people who write about the internet and like what internet culture and stuff like that, we also a lot of us tend to have like a really strong connection to the internet because like we like had so much of like our own personal journeys were like shaped by it. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about your own like relationship with like internet history. Like what sort of social media sites did you use? What was like really some of the formative places that you hung out on?
Well, I think everyone my age would agree that Homestar Runner was a formative website.
Stop. Oh my God. I'm so glad to hear that.
You know what's crazy is that there was a time in human history when Homestar Runner was the most visited page on the internet.
It's truly amazing. And now like one of the Chapman writers, like I think is writing for Disney right now.
Terrible. I mean, good for him, but
Yeah,
anyway,
truly. Also, shout out. Thanks so much, Cecilia. I really appreciate that in the chat.
but my personal relationship with the internet, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. I was the only queer in my whole town that was detectable. You know how kids have that smell for it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh,
so the internet was where I could see myself reflected, as I think it was for many, many, many rural queers. And it was where I could puzzle myself out and start to build some kind of identity. And it was also a creative outlet, and it was a place I could make friends. The internet played a really important role in how I grew up. And I would say as much for the worse as for the better, because it is an unregulated, unreliable, and sometimes dangerous place. But for all that, I don't think I'd trade growing up on the internet.
Yeah.
I got a chance that other generations did not have to know people all over the world and to be with a community that could not be together physically. Those are really special things.
Yeah. I definitely understand what you mean. I feel the same way too. Like, I feel like the internet, of that sort of like the 2000s, like the very late 90s, but mostly like the 2000s to like very, very early 2010s, was like a place where there was sort of like, I had like a interview earlier today where I kind of called it like the Wild West of like the internet. I really felt like anything goes and like you could do and build anything.
Yep.
And that's like, it's a little bit mythologizing it. Like that's not entirely true either. And also like in the same way that the Wild West is mythologized like crazy and erases a lot of stuff, right? Like but so much of like the early internet history, it really did feel like you could find like all these sort of like communities and places that were like hidden in plain sight, and a lot of places that like you could actually learn a lot about queerness. Like I remember, for me, I was like basically like I was like a fandom kid, and then I was like an image board kid, and then I was like a Tumblr kid. Like that was my trajectory, which explains a lot about how I ended up as an adult. But but like so much for me, like I remember like being exposed to like actually a lot of initial ideas about queerness through like the early like that kind of 2000s like furry like all the like kind of controversies around being a furry and stuff like that. Like 12-year-old like Anna would be shocked that I'm now a furry. Like I was definitely like furries are weird, but I was exposed to a lot of like early ideas about queerness through seeing stuff about furries, right? And like learning that the furry community was actually really, really queer. And
Right.
like that was always really super important to me. I felt like this was sort of like these are little niche communities where I can learn more about like what it's like to be a person in ways that are like non-normative by like the mainstream sort of like in my case suburban New Jersey kind of standard of what like what you're supposed to be and what kind of cultures and subcultures you can be part of.
Right. It's this world where, as imperfect as it is, and is still kind of inseparably coupled to mainstream culture as anything is. You can find an image of a different way to be a person. And I think especially in the sort of sterile non-world of like white America,
Yeah.
that's quite a thing.
Yeah, seriously. Like, so much of like my contemporary kind of online experience has been one of like being exposed to folks from different cultures outside of like specifically like not just like northeastern United States and not just even like other countries in within North America, but like other ways of being and living within like English speaking, like say, you know, until I left Twitter, like on English speaking Twitter, right? Like that was enormously like influential to me to like meet all these different writers and creators that were operating outside of like they're operating outside of the United States, that were operating outside of the West, that were showing different ways to be queer, to showing different ways how to create content that like is whether it's like adult content, whether it's just sort of like queer content from different cultures. Like that really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I feel like we're really running at risk of losing on the contemporary internet because so much of it is controlled by like some random people that you do not know, that do not know you and do not care about you, that decide what is or isn't allowed on the net.
Right. And I think that that pressure of that social change is so insidious. You know, Martin Scorsese was talking the other day about that word content and how it flattens all art and creative endeavor into just something that exists a priori, you know, from nowhere. And I really feel that there's this endless flood of stuff, and many companies who ideally would like us to forget that anyone makes it at all.
Yeah, it's so true.
And as someone who is a huge workaholic who busts her ass to make things, it bums me out, man.
Yeah, seriously. Especially because one of my favorite things as both like a creator and like a consumer of that content is really like getting, you know, not necessarily these days getting to know the creators, although that's really been like super important to me. But also just like respecting the like time and hard work that goes into that sort of content. Like, I know like reading your work, for instance, reading the sort of criticism that you've put out, right? Like a lot of that stuff, like I can both feel it and like what you've written, but also just like knowing you as a person and knowing what you care about, like it comes from a really heartfelt and like passionate place, right? And like when people think of like content as something like you put on your phone and then like you disengage with like within 5 minutes of finishing it and you don't care about it, or you just like throw a thought about it out into the void of like twitter.com and see how many quote tweets you get, like it loses that the specialness of like the creation and like how much hard work goes into it and how much it can be like agony too, right? Like I know as a adult creator, for instance, like I make a lot of I'm really careful and conscientious about like the sort of experiences and characters that I represent in my like queer trans adult art, right? And so like people forget a lot of times like how much thought and care and how much vulnerability goes into what we make.
Right, especially when you're talking about an individual creator, someone who is just some schlub in an apartment somewhere. You know, we don't have Disney behind us.
Yeah, right.
There's no lawyer coming. Like,
yeah, exactly. And this like Disneyification of content these days, which is just utterly like, I know you've written about it a lot, and like every time I like think about your writing about that, it like really it makes me reflect a lot on how much we're losing right now. Like I feel so much of like not just like culture and art, but also like how we communicate with each other is increasingly being controlled by corporations, which means like we get flattened, we get turned into like these little neat boxes, right? Like here's the lesbian representation, like here is the trans representation, and it's like you can't put me in a box, like I'm gonna break out of that box.
Right. It just has nothing to do with me, is the way that I feel about it now. I know that there's nothing I can do to prevent gigantic corporations from monetizing experiences like mine, whenever it becomes advantageous to do so. But I do feel really protective and proud and thrilled by work like yours and work inside the freaky trans community, where people do not want to have the white picket fence, but there's a trans flag in the yard.
Yeah, right.
You
Something
know,
I've literally seen in Jersey, by the way, speaking
of
of.
course. You know, that's how can people want something else if they've never been told what it is?
Hmm. So true.
Which is part of why art is important. It's to show someone a world you can have.
Mm.
Build and broaden empathy. But I'm sorry, I forgot where I was going.
No, I love what you said though, and also I'm flattered, so thank you. But
I love your work, Anna. I think you're a fantastic writer.
oh, same to you, Gretchen.
I appreciate that.
I love how this stream is us complimenting each other. Like I feel like that's kind of positivity I need.
Yeah. I feel like we should be getting paid for this.
Seriously. But in all seriousness, like I think I think what you speak to, like sort of a lot of the problems of like that representation where you're looking ultimately for like that white picket fence that's like you can throw a trans flag onto it. Like I care so much about like the sort of like quote unquote like messy and what currently exists as like non-monetizable sort of communities out there that sometimes are queer, sometimes are not, but usually are kind of like deeply rooted into queerness. Like I wrote about Otherkin a few months ago, and it was like a really deep dive into like the Otherkin community and sort of like the experience of like these sort of like these I think one of my sources put it really well, like the weird queer world of like these identities. And I love it because like these identities, they're not neat, like they're not monetizable. Like you're not going to go into Sephora and no one's going to be like, here's the Otherkin makeup for you, right? Like it's just not happening, or at least not right now. It could one day. But I love those communities because they are challenging so much about like the preconceived, like for us, for those of us that are outside of those specific like weird queer communities, it forces us to really challenge our preconceived notions of like what identity is, what bodies are, what queerness is, right? Like what does it mean to not be human, which fascinates me as someone who's like really into like esoteric and occult shit. Like I love that, I live for it. But also like I really care a lot about that community because it's one that is like traditionally highly stigmatized, despite the fact that this community is just trying to, you know, it's just they're trying to be themselves and they're trying to explore a different kind of identity. And why should we be the ones to say that like they can't have that? And that's why like this sort of like non-corporate social media is so important to me, because when you have a corporation controlling how speech happens, like that risk of, say, having your community of like weird queers being totally decimated because like someone saw you use like a slur that's like reclaimed for you, and like it suddenly like a moderator is like, you can't say that, like
And you know, the people you didn't exchange contact information with are gone from your life, and
exactly,
there's your whole support network shot to pieces by some suit.
like seriously, like literally at work this week, like that was exactly an issue that we were dealing with. One of the sex workers that I follow was Carta Madeira, actually like really rose the flag on this. This is about Chloe Corrupt. Like Chloe was banned from Twitter because she posted like you know, she posted a video from a shoot, and Twitter decided it was revenge porn. Obviously it wasn't, right? She shot with another model. The other model like was also on Twitter, didn't get banned, and was like, hey, like here is the consensual recording of us shooting together, right? Like this was totally planned and this is just content and this is fine. And like she was still wiped from Twitter and suspended, and like we didn't even know how to contact her for that story. Eventually the writer got in touch, and I was able to help direct her a little bit too in the newsroom. But like you know, reporters can't reach these people when they get suspended. Friends can't reach these people. Like, you know, the people that care about you, your own community can't, because like like you said, some suit is like, you know what, like you totally utterly, like I get to decide like what is right for a community to say because I'm in charge. And like that's so fucked up. Like that should not, that's just like fundamentally really like it's the fact that that's the state of like modern social media is really fucked up.
It's really terrible. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that a lot of people who are effectively fascists are in that position of power.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, at best, fascists by omission, who have allowed Twitter to be what it is for a decade now. And at worst, actual white nationalists. And these people have a ton of arbitrary power over how people connect and how people make a living. You know, it's like if you put a bunch of some guy's uncles in charge of the marketplace and they can just come and turn your stall over and be like, your fruit is bad, you're wrong, you can't sell fruit here anymore.
Good metaphor for Wall Street, by the way.
Thank you. That's exactly what it's like.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so true though. Like literally that's how it operates.
It's a black box. You have no recourse. If they decide that you can't have a storefront anymore, that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
When I got banned in 2018, I was very, very, very lucky that the showrunner of Billions likes my work and made a stink about it. Otherwise, I don't know what I'd be doing now. I certainly wouldn't have a book deal. But yeah, that kind of vulnerability it's unacceptable and it's cruel and it forces people to live with so much unnecessary stress.
Yeah, seriously. I totally know what you mean. That happened to me. Like when I got suspended because of like a turf swarm campaign.
I remember.
Yeah, that was like I think like a year ago now, maybe more. And it must have been more because the only way I got unbanned was literally because I had a press contact at Twitter, and I was able to I remember for like a full week, that whole week they were just like suspending trans women left and right, and I would basically just I was just fielding it one contact to another, being like, hey, why was this person banned? Why was this person banned? Why was this person banned? And she would unsuspend them, and I had to use that press contact, which was risky for me as a member of the press, right? It's something that really I technically shouldn't have been doing, but to be fair to myself, I might have reported on those anyway. So I was asking for comment for a reason. But also if I did not have that press contact there, I don't know what would have happened to my account, and I don't know what would have happened to my friends' accounts. They wouldn't have them right now. And they ended up replacing that PR contact I had at Twitter was really sweet and amazing. She really at least kind of pulled back some of she pulled back the veil a little bit, and ended up being I couldn't get in touch with her anymore. I think she left. Wouldn't be surprised because she was so approachable. And now there's another PR contact there who is much less much more kind of I want to control how articles come out, and sort of much more rigid about statements and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, and it's I've gone from having some access to a total utter black box, and I don't know what I can do, and I don't know how to interpret those things as a journalist. I remember Hacking Hustling did an amazing research story, research report about shadow banning, and I've been reporting about sex workers' rights for 3 years now, and there was stuff in that report that I did not even realize about how Twitter works, literally screen grabs of leaked shit about shadow banning that proves that they have a UI in place on an administrative end to shadow ban and restrict users. And it's that's for reporters, that's just a black box. We don't know, we can only say so much, and Twitter purposely keeps it that way so they can control how speech works.
Right, because social medias are fiefdoms.
Literally.
They are these companies that are so vast and so unaccountable and have so much power. I mean, they in terms of political influence and capital and property, they dwarf Bell Telephone at its height when it was broken up into the baby bells. How do you an economic and social landscape like that? It's so corpocratic.
Really, and it's disturbing because it feels increasingly, I remember being on a panel at FlameCon a few years ago with Tina Horn, and Tina Horn was stressed there, and I love Tina. She's so insightful, also really amazing queer artist doing some amazing comic work, and Tina stressed repeatedly sex workers are the canary in the coal mine, right? Yep. And a lot of the point that her comic makes and her work makes too is that like there's overlaps there. Like adult creators are often also like a canary in the coal mine for that stuff too, but especially sex workers are because of whorephobia. And like so much of these things happening with exactly the sort of like power systems that you're describing started specifically through attacking sex workers and also like attacking trans folks as well. Like there's many canaries in that coal mine, so to speak.
Right. And especially because so many of us are sex workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Like literally, like
Yeah.
Christ, like
I know people will always be like, oh, it's so stereotypical. All the trans women were sex workers. Man, find me 10 trans women, 8 of whom have not done some sex work. Like,
seriously.
come on.
It's like so many of us do or did. Like I remember when I first moved to New York and when I was like within my first year of transitioning and like all of my friends, like I would say at least half of them like were doing or did sex work or at the very least were on the precipice of doing, like they considered it very deeply. Like that was just the reality. Like and there's such a huge overlap and it's often it's like the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, no shit, no wonder why so many trans women are really supportive of sex workers, right? Because like that's my
Right.
friends out there. Like
Right. You know, I was a dominatrix for I think 2 years right before FOSTA and SESTA came down.
oh shit,
And
yeah.
I was so lucky to get out when I did. It's hard to conceive of an approach to policing sex work that is more punitive to the people doing it than to any circumstance related to any kind of labor regulation at all.
Yeah.
You know, every job is an exploitation of the human body because that's how capitalism works.
Yeah, right.
But for some reason, as soon as like someone's fucking, pardon my French,
you can't say that word on Twitch. I'm gonna censor you.
yeah, as soon as the abominable act commences, then suddenly it's fair game for this hysterical panic.
Yeah.
And I know this is a classic example, but no one bats an eye about football players who are, you know, giving themselves early onset dementia, or retail workers who are developing back problems and like chronic foot pain and anxiety disorders. The landscape of work in America is so toxic and terrible. None of us are unscathed by it. And I think sex workers are exceptional only in that they have even fewer protections. So it sucks even worse.
Yeah, seriously. Like so much of like Revolting Prostitutes, which is a really great book for a lot of people that are like here and are like, I want to know more about the 101 of like doing, you know, more specifically in that case full service sex work. Like so much of that book really stresses like the goal is not just like full decrim and not just like intersectionality of other issues that affect sex workers, such as like you know, like getting rid of borders to protect migrant sex workers, but also like so much of it is just about getting that point of labor rights. And like for a lot of people, like they really either do not give a shit about sex workers, so they're not going to treat them like human beings in the first place, or for the ones that are like sympathetic but don't really understand completely, like they don't even have the sense of understanding like what the labor landscape is for sex workers, which is like bullshit. It's like really, really, really bad because of all that discrimination and stigma. Like there are no labor rights. There's none. There's nothing. It's like Christ. Like even getting like white collar folks unionized is already really, really difficult. Like getting media folks like unionized is really, really difficult, and a lot of people don't realize how much work like will go into that, and all the sorts of different cases that have already happened. Like that's really difficult labor. Getting labor rights for sex workers, like if you think that's bad, let me introduce you to what it's like doing sex work. Like you know, like it's like it's incredible, like the amount of shit that like people across the political spectrum will give to this group that does have like, it has like not just zero labor rights, but specifically has zero labor rights because like capitalism happily fosters black markets that like really encourage like the ability to exploit the people that are doing the labor in those markets.
Total exploitation, unregulated. Yeah.
Exactly. Literally the definition of how a black market would operate. It's just
Yeah.
like, yeah.
God, this is so depressing to think about.
If you, this is like such a great advertisement for my book. Like, would you like to be depressed for a weekend? Like,
but I think that something that is really germane to your book
Mhm.
is the way that Tumblr allowed a user's sexuality to sit comfortably alongside their taste in aesthetics,
mm,
their interests in fiction or movies. You know, it was like the therapeutic concept of integration.
mm,
You are creating a person whose parts are not in active conflict. And obviously that's a tremendous social threat because so much of our country is run on a kind of learned sexlessness
mm,
so that sex can stay a place where people have coercive power and can have outsized influence on another person, where you can have control and predation and
mm.
secrecy.
Seriously.
Uh,
There was a sex therapist that I interviewed for an article when I think I was writing about like forced feminization for trans women and why
Mhm.
like so many of us are into it, which I really loved writing. Like that was so fun to do because that was a time when, I mean, like it's still really stigmatized to talk about, but like back then there was like, you couldn't find any research, you couldn't find an article about that at all unless you went on like Reddit and like looked at RS transgender and was like, good luck, you know? And it feels so much like I know I lost my train of thought because all I can think about now is like forced feminization porn, which is just such a fascinating topic. I love it.
It is. I love how deeply Tori Peters gets into that.
I fucking love Detransition Baby, by the way. It's such a good
It's
book.
incredible. I mean, like, I know everyone's reading it, everyone's having takes about it. It's great. Tori's a genius. You should go read it. Stop being a weenie.
Exactly. It's like Nevada all over again, but like Detransition Baby, in my opinion, is like way for personally, I love Detransition Baby a lot more than Nevada, but the same discourse is happening all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, I do think the Transition Baby is like very definitively of this moment.
Yeah.
And even though it's sort of like, you know, Tori's taking on the bourgeois novel, whereas Nevada is much more like hard scrabble cockroach people,
Yeah.
which are my people. Tori's not doing that thoughtlessly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like
Uh,
very specifically like picking away at the specific trans experience. And I think it was like Morgan and Page that wrote like, you know, review, like everyone in this novel, like everyone doesn't look so hot in it. Like everyone is doing
Right.
things that's not so great, which is
Everyone
what I love about it.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah,
any great work of art, everyone is gonna look kind of like a piece of shit because that's what humans are like.
exactly. We all
No
kind of do things that are
human-
not so great.
right. I say this all the time, but pain is an unavoidable consequence of human connection.
Mm,
And not simply because, you know, interests conflict and not all conflict is resolvable, but because people aren't great at interacting with people. We're a weird, prickly species, and we hurt each other constantly.
mm, so
Um,
true.
I mean, I imagine that if you took another species of ape and made it like go to offices and care about who has what car, it would also go completely insane.
I love that idea. I feel like that's incredibly accurate. Like I'm also just thinking about like various forms of intelligent like life that would be like, we already know that like octopus like use tools, like
Mhm.
I'm imagining a little octopus that's being disillusioned by capitalism, which
Right, the octopus is sitting there like, oh man, I don't even know why I crack clams open and suck them out with my radula anymore.
I feel like I've read an adult, like a queer adult comic that's like that, like some sort of octopus girl, and she's like, I'm so disillusioned, I'm gonna go have like I'm gonna go meet like some hot human girls.
It definitely sounds like something a trans girl would make.
It definitely does. I was about to say, like, that's definitely the kind of adult game that I would make. It's like demons, like snake girls, like octopus that are disillusioned by capitalism. It's like, boom, I have like a trilogy right there.
All the classics. Um,
Oh my god.
you know, it's like the archetypal set of conflicts: man versus nature, man versus God, man versus himself, octopus girl versus capitalism.
Christ, oh my god. That's such a great idea. I need to do that now as like a because I actually like I do have like trans girl versus God sort of thing, and I have a trans girl versus nature. So now I need like some sort of like I guess like self-cest sort of story now. So like, and it's all wraps up together.
I fully endorse it. I feel like as trans people, we're fundamentally cheated out of the experience of fucking ourselves. That would be so healing.
It would be. God, I really should. I am working on a story that's like some sort of like hypnosis therapist one that I'm really excited for, because like that's like sort of in the realm of like the same way that like forced feminization is something that trans women love, and also like having like a dominatrix that tells you like you're a good girl is like something that trans women love. Like trans women also really love hypnosis, like because it makes sense where you want like someone to sweep in and like you know control our problems for us and stuff like that. So you know, got to go to the hypnodome for that.
Exactly. You know, what does anyone want in life but a humble hypnodome? It's all their own. You know,
A mommy hypnodome, GF.
all of that stuff, I do think is fundamentally tied to what we've been talking about with the stresses inherent to the modern internet. Everyone wants to let go of control and stop experiencing anxiety, even if it's just for an hour or a minute or a moment. And I think that the integration of sexuality into our functional adult identities is something that capitalism cannot allow, for the same reason that capitalism broke the American workforce's back the moment it had a minute of free time at the beginning of the pandemic.
Seriously.
And there was a general uprising. You know, there was a Black-led revolution against this miserable country, and the misery it forces us to live in for no good reason.
Absolutely. And still ongoing too. Like
right. And the push to send everyone back to work wasn't just about the economy. It was about making sure that we all knew definitively that we would never be allowed a moment to rest. That if we did, we'd die.
Yeah. Literally. It's so true. And it's so much thinking about it even now too, the way that you know, in New York, for instance, like every day there's still protests going on. There's still protests that are just like the summer ones. They're a little smaller, but they're still going on. They're still really strong. And the ways in which that has just been totally erased, not just by the media, but also censorship on social media. Again, that amazing research paper that Hacking Hustling did very specifically proved that like sex workers who are activist organizers and protesters, or a term AOP that they use, sex workers who are AOPs that were like tweeting about Black Lives Matter were most likely to get censored. It's like not a coincidence. It's never a coincidence. And so yeah, so much of that, it's all interconnected, it's all tied together, and so much about like no, it's fine. I remembered, by the way, before I got distracted by forced feminization, a common happening in my life. I remember now, there was an amazing interview I had for that forced feminization like column story that I did with this sex therapist who explained like so much about society works through and like the modern kind of Western capitalist society, this like Christian society, this like fascist Christian society works by specifically controlling sex, because sex is the start of controlling people's actions, behaviors, lives, their morality and their ethics. I love the way she put it. It's like if you can control someone's sexuality by the balls, like you've got them. Like you've got them completely. And it's so true. Like look at the way people treat each other, like for that reason, and how much self-policing happens over like as a marginalized person, you can't be too horny, you can't be too sexy. Like we need you to be objects of desire, not subjects of it. And it's so fucked up. Like let's let trans women like, have sex. Like please, for Christ's sake.
Right. And it comes to a point where that way of thinking colonizes our brains. And you wind up with a queer sexual world that self-polices, like you said, and that becomes brittle and unsafe and unself-aware.
Very much so.
And community self-policing is the goal of all authoritarian states, because they'll do it better than any Gestapo ever could.
Yeah.
And
Why, like,
everyone critically will live in terror of each other and have no connections.
right. Yeah. It's literally the way things are going right now. Like that's exactly the sort of community that we're at risk of running into. In a lot of ways it's already here, right? Like we're so scared of our fellow queers, we're so scared of our fellow trans women. Like Detransition Baby has that whole passage that went viral about like the baby elephants. And like it's true though. It's like we have been I remember like when I wrote that feature story about public sex, and like there was a lot of outrage about that, right? And that was really what that article was it was going back to Pat Califia's writing, and it was going back to like this more radical leather tradition that a lot of people had lost, generationally speaking, and had never had access to because of the fact that AIDS wiped out all the radical queers, right? Like it killed so many of the people that would have been our elders and our ancestors, like just gone. And the way that people responded to that article, part of what I was trying to do when I wrote about that stuff, and what I still do in my writing, when even though I've kind of taken a breather because it's really hard to do that stuff, but part of what I've been trying so hard to do is point out to people like this is our history, like this is what we're losing and at risk of losing, and people are really okay with losing it because like, and from an optics level, they'll say that they're like, they're like anti-fascists and stuff like that, but really they do want to like conform to society, and they don't want to at least question these things. Like I don't need everyone to be like super 100% like A+ down with like Pat Califia's rating on public sex, but like everyone should engage with it and think critically about it. And like that's lost.
Yeah, it is. That is so far from the front of today's culture war that you can't see it.
Yeah.
Which is a goddamn shame.
Yeah.
Pride is about sex. Pride is about fucking. Pride is about the fact that we're not allowed to do those things.
Yeah.
And
literally.
That's what it's always been. And that's, what to me it will always mean.
Yeah.
And I do think that you're right, that, it's common for the kind of people who will turn narc when they see things like public sex being discussed to talk about themselves as anti-fascists and to talk about themselves as communists. But from what I have seen and experienced, note that is a disclaimer, this is total,
Right.
they are disconnected people who live in fear because of the way they treat others and each other. It is a cannibalistic societal dead end where you sit and wait and watch each other until someone slips up and you can recreate the thrill of ripping apart a social deviant. It inevitably eats itself and it leaves a trail of carnage in its wake.
It's so true. It's so true. And I remember when I read that passage in Detransition Baby about the traumatized baby elephants, like I like sat there and I cried because it's so true. We would not have this problem like if we really actually had not just generational connection, but a community that really internalized like like I think all the time about the irony of detransition baby, all these sort of like, you know, like a lot of like these newly out like trans femmes that like have not been through these issues, that have not experienced them firsthand and how they rip apart communities. And like a lot of them like absolutely like railing on detransition baby, saying this is not representative of me, this is not representative of my experiences. And like, hey, not all art has to, that's fine, but that passage makes a really good point about the reality of the situation, which is like we rip each other apart, and like we all have that inside of us, that like kind of cop that we have to like work hard to kill.
Yeah.
And it's simultaneously because we don't have that generational connection that we're kind of stuck like not really being able to build it because of this happening and driving people out of our own communities. But also at the same time, the fact that people just don't care to engage with the truth. Like people want the picket fence because it's a nice happy image that like stokes their
Comfortable
like
and
little,
quiet.
yeah, it stokes their like little fantasies that they can fit into the world, and like they can be like this, they can be like the good Tran, right? They could be the
Right.
Blair White.
And I think critically, it's an image of security. I mean, you know, what's a fence for?
Right.
Um,
Keep people out.
yeah. It's for making good neighbors. No. But all security is predicated on the idea that life is controllable, which it isn't.
Right.
And it's
Exactly.
predicated on the idea that an individual life is a packet sealed away from everything else, which it isn't. You can treat it that way, but its only effect is your own immiseration and everyone else's.
Exactly.
People talk a lot about the queer community. I don't know what they mean.
It's true.
And I have seen queer community, but there is no monolithic queer community. It is a fractious and difficult sea of very different people whose values are radically in conflict. And as you said, so much of it stems from AIDS and what we lost. And
So true.
you were talking about the baby elephants. I cried at that part too. And it tied into something that I spent a lot of time thinking about for the last few years, which is why it bothered me so much when I meet, you know, sort of neo-puritanical corporatist younger queers. And I realized, well, my relationships with queers who are younger than me are very special to me because I get to provide them the guidance that we don't get from the queer parents we don't have.
Exactly.
And when I see them turning away from that, not necessarily with me, but just in general, it breaks my heart. These, you know, these are our kids, and something is so fucked up.
Yeah. It's really true. I I think all the time about a friend of mine, after I wrote like a really scathing article about females by Andrea Longchu, and I'm not a fan of a lot of Andrea Longchu's writing, but a really dear friend of mine like approached me and was like, "Hey, look, Anna, like I'm not like, you know, I've noticed like there's a this was sort of like a few years ago. She sort of like gave me a reality check and was basically like, "Hey, I'm noticing like a lot of your writing these days is really you kind of like railing at other trans women. Like you should stop and think about that." And the level of impact that had to have someone that I cared about and trusted and really just fundamentally looked up to so deeply confront me in that way and tell me like basically in so many words like you're pulling out knives for other trans women, you got to stop. Like that radically changed my relationship with other trans women and with myself, and it radically changed my relationship with trans women I don't like or I disagree with or I've had issues with, because it made me understand that like fundamentally like I can keep that shit, you know, to myself and my close friends, right? Like I can talk to them about that stuff. It's inappropriate to go on social media and like fucking blast them because like I don't know, we don't get along, right? You know, like
They
and
have the
that
wrong opinion about TV or whatever.
or yeah, exactly, because most of the time it's really dumb petty shit. Like, you know, it's like
I mean,
God.
we just to keep quoting Tori Peters here, we hurt each other so badly because we know how to, because we can get close enough.
Yeah,
And because we
exactly.
constantly see ourselves reflected back in everyone we interact with. And that's very painful for people who spend big chunks of their lives obsessing about themselves.
Seriously. people are really, especially for the trans, for the trans feminine folks that deal with this stuff that's really kind of like, like the antithesis of the white picket fence, right? Like they get really scared of those trans femmes, those trans women that are doing that stuff. I mean, like I can't think of, I can't count how many times I've like noticed someone who's like said like Anna Valens is like a huge pervert and like a weirdo. And it's like I always like will, occasionally like I'll look at the tweet and sort of dig at what they're gonna say. And it's always kind of goes in the same direction, which is like this person is saying things that make me personally uncomfortable because I'm afraid that I am secretly her. Like it always is like that. It's like that sort of like I'm projecting my insecurities, my fears of like being the monstrous trans femme, right?
And I
Whereas
think
like
a lot of trans women look at other trans women and fear that they're her.
yeah.
Which is all just projection and internalized self-hatred. All the calls are coming from inside the house. It's all Black Christmas all the way down.
Seriously. It's just one gigantic form of internalized trans misogyny.
And just for the record, I hate the shit you have to put up with. It drives me nuts. I mean, I have never seen you do something that I thought was a legitimate like entry point for a beef with someone. Which is crazy. Like every human being is obnoxious and weird and focused on shit I don't care about. But like none of that really matters.
Yeah.
I was talking with my friend Julia Graffer the other day, who's a fantastic pornographer, among many other things. And I was saying that sometimes I wish I could make a graph of how something becomes radically less important the less immediately it's related to your personal life. Like your feelings don't matter in a wider moral context when you're dealing with people you don't know and aren't interacting with. And I think that is one colossal consequence of the internet that we will be dealing with for the rest of our lives.
It's so true. I know personally, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. And same to you as well. Like I really feel like every step of the way, like the shit that you've been put through was always in bad faith and always was shit that just like it was targeted for a reason. It came from a place of bigotry, hatred, internalized phobia, and not always internalized either, right? Like a lot of times it was specifically like people outside of the trans feminine community targeting you for misogynistic reasons. And I feel so much of this shit like I definitely agree with you, and for the longest time that was how I dealt with it too. I really felt so much like the less a person knows about me, the more that it doesn't matter what their opinion is, because you don't know me. Like I don't put the real me on the internet, right? Like there's parts of me that's real, that's like on like my social media platforms and stuff, right? Like there's opinions that I have that are real, there's things that I do that are real, but like people also like if you quiz people, like they would not be able to name all the personal facts about me, and because there's a lot of things I don't put on the internet. And in the same way, I think really the turning point for me where it's sort of like I'm done with Twitter, like that the point where it's just sort of like I can't use this anymore. This is not a good platform for me. Was realizing both the addictive cycle of like wanting to see what people are saying about you, which just never ends well, but also like realizing like this is sort of it, right? It's people that don't know you coming up with opinions about you so you could sell like your games to them, right? Or you can get like an extra 10 clicks on your article that you wrote.
Yep.
It's fundamentally I wish people would really look in the mirror and think hard about how we're engaging with each other, because it's always the same. We always end up driving off the trans femmes that people look up to. And like people really need to stop and think why that's happening and why it keeps happening. And like all these things are, again, like for me, my decision to hop off Twitter is way more complicated than just that. A lot of it also is about my own relationship with social media, taking time away to explore myself and understand myself. But also people just need to stop and like, think about the fact that like this is a pattern, right? Like this is not good.
Right. I mean, you can only beat your head against a wall for so long before whatever's happening to your brain becomes permanent.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, should we maybe open things up to question and answer?
Speaking of putting our heads against the wall and seeing what comes out. But no, yeah. I did want to say really quickly, thank you, Gretchen, for that amazing conversation. This is truly excels beyond all expectations.
This has been a real pleasure, Anna. I'm very flattered you asked me to be on. I've had a great time.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I was expecting to have a good time, but you're right. This did kind of blow what I was expecting away.
A good really opportunity to explore like all sorts of different feelings about these topics, both related to the Tumblr book and just also in general, you know, very, yeah.
That's a good point, Jean. When trans women who care for one another talk, everyone wins.
It's so true, really.
And that is one other thing that I wanted to say is that whatever else there is to talk about with all that harassment and ongoing bullshit, I'm glad I've met people like you. I have friends I never would have otherwise.
No, thank you. And same to you too.
It feels like there's a world that has things and people I want to be around in it.
Thank you. I feel the same to you too. You really influenced a lot of my relationship with media and art, and you really encouraged me to read and explore and engage with art that was not mainstream and not corporate, and also learning how to like sort of navigate the ins and outs of being someone who still is inevitably going to engage with corporate media. So I really appreciate, you know, your friendship and what you do for our community. It means a lot.
Ditto, Anna.
Thanks.
So if anyone on Twitch has any questions for us, we would be happy to field them.
Please.
As you can see, we're both very beautiful and very smart. So this is your chance.
Love me some classic Twitch Q&A. Usually just a bunch of like Kappa emotes.
Yeah.
Trans Kappa emote. When?
I'm really excited for everyone to read your book. I feel like. Ooh, here we go.
Do you, Jean, Miracle, would one of, or maybe Todd, would one of you like to read the question aloud?
Yeah, I can read this question to you. Mm-hmm. Anna, this is from Tom with an I. Anna, what challenges did you face researching Tumblr porn, trying to access accounts and posts that were deleted? Are there archives available, and what kind of archiving and ban protection is happening now?
Really good question, and thanks for it, Tom with an I. I would say one of the challenges that I faced with researching the Tumblr porn book was really it's surprising how much information is just out there that you have to sort through and really kind of look over and see and find different information, both when you're drafting the book and revising it. One thing that I remember when we were going through the editing process, one of the things that I remember adding in was like a quick little section about like sex workers engagement with Tumblr, and like in the book, like I mentioned how like say sex workers would get tax advice from Tumblr, right? And like going back and finding that and finding like that blog specifically to point out like this is a thing that happened required a mixture of just a lot of going through all sorts of different blogs, which actually is a lot harder work than it sounds. And also really like carefully researching and picking out like this is a good example to include, right? It doesn't have personal information. It's something that is representative of an experience that happened on Tumblr that I was personally aware of. I had to know how to navigate Tumblr and like find that information. So it's definitely in terms of like posts and content that was deleted, I feel lucky because I had plenty of prior Tumblr experience pre-NSFW ban. And also in the book, I highlight how there are still NSFW accounts that are out there on Tumblr, mostly because they evade the censors, like plushophilia I mentioned a little bit, you know, a fetish for plushed animal, like stuffed animals for plushies, which is a really fascinating fetish because like it totally doesn't read as a fetish for like your average person who doesn't know what it is. Like one of the images they talked about was like a bear in like a jail cell. It's like, oh no, like Mr. Stuffy's in trouble. And no kink shaming. I love all kinks, but also like all like kinks like within reason. But like for that one for me, just like the just It is a little funny though. Like this teddy bear is like in a bondage situation, and a Tumblr censor is like, "That's not porn. It never could be porn."
Nothing sexual going on here.
Move along, boys. Move along.
It's like those people who are into sitting on and popping a balloon. I've always envied them because it's such an affordable fetish.
I know, right? I've always wanted to shoot that kind of porn too. Like I feel like my roommate would literally kill me if I like did balloon porn here. But like I've always wanted to sit on a balloon and see what happens. I feel like
It's
it'd be fun.
definitely the most like aurally obnoxious fetish. But another thing you
Absolutely.
could probably skate on.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Or like wet look, where you jump in the pool while fully dressed and then come out.
That's a good one too. Oh, I wish in Brooklyn, like I have zero pool access. I can't shoot that. I can't shoot that. But yeah, I would say in terms of, I actually didn't go as much through archiving content. I did a lot more talking to folks for past reporting and getting their experience, and also using, a little bit of like personal memory, but you have to be careful there because memory can be subjective. Even though I was exposed to a lot of Tumblr content, you still there's a fine line between, using subjective information to inform reporting and just saying like, oh yeah, I remember things were like this. That's how it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, great question. Awesome. Bring on the questions. Ask us things. I demand it.
That's such a fascinating challenge, though. Like combing back through totally disorganized, incoherent, book-length bodies of work.
Oh my God, don't get me started. I would say honestly that was one of the biggest challenges, was just it was a lot of reading and a lot of research more than anything. I technically was very lucky because I had a head start doing a lot of reporting at the Daily Dot ahead of time. A lot of like when Gene and I originally chatted about creating the book, I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I have a lot of past reporting that like I can use and aggregate. And a lot of the conversations I had with sources then informed the reporting that I did. This information that was like published and like and everything. It like helped guide me as I did it. But yeah, it was a real lot of information, a real lot of just sort of like double checking things, going back, making sure I had everything accurate, looking at the history of it. It was really like a definition of like a research intensive book.
Maybe we should tackle the second part, like what in terms of archiving and ban protection is happening with all the content on Tumblr now.
Oh, that's a good point. I missed that. In terms of archiving and ban protection happening, I'm admittedly not quite as familiar with what's going on these days. I do still like spend a little bit of time on Tumblr following certain blogs and seeing what's happening. I have noticed that I think some of the initial clampdown NSFW material is not as strong these days. And so some of it is still sort of like, can you get through the censors or not? Is it going to be noticed or not? I would say also in terms of archiving, a lot of the biggest moves really is people finding ways to make sure they can move content off of Tumblr and not just be reliant on Tumblr. There is this mindset that like you need to be off of Tumblr, and that successfully led to people posting their content on other sites. Whether that's going to last in the long term, there's a lot of fear about Twitter inevitably banning NSFW content. I think the lawsuit that I wrote about from NCOS, I agree with like a lot of the experts saying it's probably not necessarily going to cause an NSFW ban, but you never really know. Sometimes the least likely sources are when these things happen anyway. I would definitely say that TLDR though, it's really important for a lot of Tumblr users to make sure they have multiple sources to post their stuff.
Okay, the next question we've got comes from Pochi Thomas saying, Anna and Gretchen, was there any specific or niche Tumblr blog you were fascinated by pre-purge? P.S. You were beautiful and amazing.
Solid postscript. Thank you.
Yeah. Gretchen, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. I would say that the most niche Tumblr blog that I was into, and I don't think it exists anymore, but it was a dude who recorded spiders weaving webs. And it was the most exquisite, beautiful thing I have ever seen. It was so like Henry Darger at his desk. This guy was so dedicated. He had little cameras set up all over his house. And you could watch these incredibly beautiful arachnids making these things that humans can't really effectively imitate for hours. And I mean, when else in human history have you had raw access to footage like that?
Mm.
And that's this grain of sand on the fantastic beach that is Tumblr.
I love stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a lot of great porn on there back in the day.
Oh my God, don't get me started. Twitter queer porn pales in comparison to what was available back then.
Yep, absolutely.
In terms of my own specific or niche Tumblr blog, I feel like, oh gosh, like I actually feel really grateful in that a lot of the porn folks that were on Tumblr during that time successfully made the transition to Twitter. So I feel like I haven't lost too much of that content personally. I will say the one that I found in the pre-purge era that I really was fascinated by a lot, there was I really am really fascinated by the realm of just amateur porn on Twitter, not Twitter, Tumblr. And I really feel like there was this one blog where you could basically just like submit audio recording of like yourself masturbating or moaning or so and it get posted. I forget the specific name, but I remember like including it in like an article that I wrote that was like a guide to Tumblr porn and everything. And I just thought like this is such a cool idea. Like you could just like you can like rub one out and record it and you can submit it to somebody. It's gonna get posted online and then people are gonna like it and retweet it and like also rub one out to it. Like it's sort of like the butterfly effect, but for jerking off. Like it's amazing.
Right, like if a butterfly jerks off in Central Park, eventually every butterfly will be jerking off.
Exactly. That's how it happens. That's how modern consciousness theory says that's exactly how consciousness works. If one person jacks off, everyone jacks off. So
yep, that's string theory. That's entanglement, baby.
String theory. Oh yeah, because that's what comes out when you're done jacking off. So
right, string.
Yeah.
If you're a healthy human.
If you're a healthy human. But yeah, I loved that one. Sort of continued through the Gone Wild audio tradition, but like there was something special about like submitting it to someone who like curates the masturbating on a microphone
Yeah,
blog.
It's kind of special.
Yeah.
I remember there was an anonymous submission Tumblr for like fat women taking nudes, and it was run by a fat woman. And it was mostly lesbians. And like, you know, inevitably it drew a lot of engagement from the most repulsive chasers you can imagine.
Oh yeah.
But that was so important to me to like be in this space where we all wanted to look at each other. And, you know, so much of the appeal of sex with people like you is that you've been taught intensely to hate yourself, and that's focused on your own body. But it does project outwards. And if you can find things in other people that also exist in you, inevitably you may love them and come to yourself in that way.
Amen. That's my personal experience of that too. And I definitely understand what you mean too. Like my experiences using Tumblr and looking at Tumblr porn from like queer trans women, like this was before I transitioned, because I transitioned in like 2016. I technically started I technically started coming out when I was a Tumblr user, but like I really came out as a trans woman in 2015 and then started hormones in 2016. So that's sort of like prior experience looking at like other, you know, as a closeted trans woman, looking at other trans women like doing porn and being attractive and people like gassing them up and being like, yeah, you're amazing. Like that was super formative to me in a way that like I think I would not be who I am today without that. It's amazing to see.
Oh my gosh, the conversation is both educational and like magical. I appreciate these physics facts y'all are bringing.
Yes. String theory, baby, butterfly effect.
Oh, I feel like I'm getting like a degree in this like science.
I mean, this is the finest science that blockbuster movies from 1998 can bring you.
Exactly. Metaphysical sexology, you know, I mastered in that. I have a PhD in like sex stuff, but I have like a master's in like metaphysical sexiness.
Amazing.
That feels like something straight like some sort of like queer porn like thing. I don't know.
Okay. Speaking of like how like subjects are organized, right? Here's a question from New Jack Cole saying like, often online it seems like porn is often separated out from other content, But in Tumblr, it was fully integrated, which I thought made it so special. Do either of you have any thoughts on the way such material was incorporated alongside fine art, history, etc.?
I definitely feel like, that was not just intentional, but super important to the actual creation of like Tumblr. Um, that was like fundamentally when Tumblr was being created and when the question of porn came up, there is a real insistence that like adult content belongs on Tumblr. That was built into its fundamental creation and fundamental design. And in the early years of Tumblr, when there were like one or two moments when there was a misstep around porn and a misstep around handling NSFW content, and Tumblr would reel back and be like, "Our bad. Like, you know what? Like, it's super important to make sure porn is on this platform." So one of the most important things I want to stress is that I was mentioning this earlier in another interview that I did. Like, Donna Haraway has this idea, like technology makes us, in that like we both use technology, but technology lives within us. Like we both live with it, and it lives within us, right? And so much of that is true of Tumblr's design, right? Like Tumblr was designed in a specific way that ultimately was adult content friendly, but that design function ultimately helped people better create a different relationship with adult content, sexual content, than they would have on other sites that didn't necessarily have such an NSFW friendly design added into it. So I really do want to stress that like the cultural impact of that, the cultural impact that NSFW inclusive design can have is enormous, because that technology is not just a thing we interact with, it's something that impacts the way we engage with the world and is super, super important.
From a more history-oriented perspective, I think for me, it's so important to remember that the segregation of porn away from art is a very recent cultural practice. This is not something you would encounter engaging with art in ancient Greece or Rome. This is not something that you would encounter in the federated tribes that made up the Aztec Empire. There was no understanding that porn was some sort of lesser or tawdry category of art. Porn didn't really exist as an idea because sexuality was integrated in different ways. And that's not to say that any of these cultures did not have their own shit about sex. I'm not interested in parsing whether or not the Aztec Empire was problematic.
See, the Greeks were never problematic about sex.
No, they were famously very, very good about having really moral, consensual sex all the time.
Yeah. No. I was reading, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was reading this amazing research report about hermaphroditus and, the sort of like trans feminine-ish coded like Greek goddess, and specifically like especially Roman, and Roman culture played a huge role. And it was this really interesting research report that totally revised our understandings of how hermaphroditus was depicted in Roman art. A lot of people would assume from a contemporary lens that hermaphroditus is never an object of desire, but actually this like thesis report found that hermaphroditus was often depicted as a fantastical but highly desirable like object of desire, right? So to kind of build off of that point, so much of our traditional understanding of past cultures, and so much of our traditional understanding of like what sex and porn is and how people traditionally engage with it and how art should be structured are cultural constructs of the current moment, of the lives that we've lived so far. And we have to remember
hearing art.
Exactly. And we have to remember that like the way we think about sex or porn or art now might be not just radically different in a prior time, but even our interpretations of how things were in the past are informed by the bigotries that we live in right now.
Yes.
It was a different world. We need to remember that there are more ways to live than the current one.
Yes, absolutely.
I just love that like fun fact too, that like there's like this trans feminine like hot chick out there in Roman art.
Yeah,
I love her.
I mean,
so
there's
good.
a whole digression to be had about like trans people in Roman culture and the places that they held in sex work and in any number of other facets of daily Roman life. But that's maybe a bit off the beaten track.
Oh yeah, just gotta close with a good chef kiss,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Amazing. How are y'all feeling on time and everything like that? We have like 3 more questions, or are you feeling like How are you feeling?
I'm definitely down to do more questions if you are, Gretchen.
Time to finish up the questions.
Okay, cool. Let's keep going. Then
Hell yeah.
one from the Subterranean. Do you think alternatives to the traditional internet, i.e. local community networks, might be a good way to fight the kind of corporate censorship that Tumblr faced?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the more friends you have in real life and the more you get invested in DIY stuff like zines, the more control you have over where your art exists and how it exists and if it exists. You know, no suit can say that your zine is banned because it's paper that you can hold.
You can always go to a queer printer and print it back out.
Exactly. And as an extension of that, the community surrounding things like that, that tradition of cheap, small, personal art is queer history.
Hmm.
And I strongly encourage anyone with an inclination to pursue it and to find it for themselves. It will change your life.
I would say myself, I definitely agree with what Gretchen said. It's really important to build those kind of alternative community structures that happen in different ways in different spaces and off the kind of traditional kind of corporate internet. One thing I do want to say as well, and this is something that I've seen a lot, is a lot of times people want to put forward an idea of kind of an alternate social media structure, alternate social media just in general. We've seen this more recently through things like Mastodon and Pleroma, which are more platforms where you can implement your own servers.
Mhm.
Those things can work well, and they're like, the Mastodon Pleroma communities, there's a lot of queer communities that are NSFW friendly that are really going strong and are doing well. But a lot of people also try to treat these alternative, specifically in terms of like online communities, these alternative like non-corporate online communities as like the alternative, the antidote to this problem.
Right.
And I remember talking to again Daniel Blunt that that runs Hacking Hustling for an article, and she made a really good point to me that stuck with me for years, which is like, sex workers want to be where the clients are, right? They want to have access to those spaces, right? Because like they do not want to be discriminated against. Like we can create alternate spaces, and that's important, but it's also really important to make sure that like the needs of that marginalized community is being met and they're not being discriminated against. And so I like to caution when people talk about alternate social media networks, especially online, that it can be beneficial to build them. It can be beneficial to have them, and they're super important to have things that are not just relying on Twitter. But also part of the fight is making sure that like that the discrimination itself stops. So you
Mhm.
kind of need both. You need alternate social media, and you need to find alternatives where everyone gets their needs met, where alternatives that hopefully attract clients for sex workers case, spaces where trans folks feel like they can meet other trans folks and be themselves there, they can express themselves, but also that we can't lose sight of the fact that like a lot of this battle is about whether queer folks, trans folks, sex workers are fundamentally allowed to exist in public spaces. And what corporate social media says is either yes, with some limitations where you basically have to go back to Gretchen's analogy, like that like white picket fence, you have to be the white picket fence gay, or like you cannot exist in a public space. And like that is like the idea that like you can't be a sex worker in a public space, you can't be queer in a public space, you can't be like a messy adult creator in a public space, like you can't be a messy creator, period. That's a huge problem that we need to remember like is really important to fight back against.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I love this so much. Okay, just a couple more questions, right? Got from Limericks, who asks, would you say that innovation in platforms for sex work has sprung up post-Sesta Fosta, or have things gotten prohibitively hard? Since the sex industry has always been a tech vanguard, where would you say that is now? And I'm sorry if this may be unanswerable for safety reasons.
I would definitely say personally, the folks that created Twitter, I'm actually really impressed by the basically the sex work ads alternative they created. Trist is utterly amazing. I know a lot of folks use it. I would say that's not just really innovative, but a really good example of Twitter's problem is sort of like it's like Twitter is supposed to be like Twitter but for sex workers, but a lot of clients don't really hang out there. clients do hang out on Tryst because they want to see sex workers, right, in person, and they want to look for these ads and they want to go meet sex workers, and like this is a good place for them to go to because it's got a good recognition now. It's got a good reputation, and it's run by a sex worker and like a sex worker and tech ally collective. And so I'm really impressed by Tryst, and I think the collective that runs it is doing amazing things. I think that that's a really good example of when you can create an alternate platform that works properly because it has like sex workers' needs in mind and is not just necessarily trying to fix a problem of censorship. Like it's actually built to help sex workers.
Right.
As for let's see, trying to post. I would say in general though, things are getting increasingly things are getting increasingly harder. The name of the game is always it's a game of whack-a-mole, right? Like a friend of mine told me that once, and it really stuck with me. It's all about migration from one platform to another. This is sort of the story of doing sex work on the internet or adult content on the internet. Hell, doing anything on the internet is sort of a story of migration, right? Like how many of us started one place and ended up in another. So I would say that it's sort of like the name of the game hasn't changed, even though the specific timeline of events is different these days. But I really do like Tryst. I think Tryst is doing good stuff.
Okay, cool. So we have just one more question, which I'm excited to ask, right? From Cat Mom Les. Where do you
Love
find
it.
good forced femme content now that Tumblr don't let you post it no more?
Anna, I'm going to let you field this one.
Oh my God. I was about to say, Gretchen, do you want to field this one? I will admit, I am not the biggest forced femme consumer these days. I am not in the pocket of big forced femme, big mommy GF. But I would definitely say, like, if I had to pick a few examples of places to go to, I all things considered, I like ManyVids. I think it's a good site. I think you can find like a lot of good like actual like shot porn there, and that includes like sissification stuff by queer creators that is on there. I wouldn't personally say, like, I can't necessarily vouch for specific models because it's a genre that I'm not as familiar with these days. My forced femme days are a little bit behind me, but but I do like ManyVids, and I do feel like there are opportunities there on places like OnlyFans and AVN stars and stuff like that, where you can find specific models doing that stuff that's good. I do feel like the real tragedy of the contemporary internet, though, is that like you can't just have like a one-stop shop to find that stuff. You really have to search for it, and you kind of have to find the wheat from the chaff. And like that's really fundamentally unfair. Like we shouldn't have to exist in a situation where the easy access that Tumblr granted us is gone, and we sort of have to like spend in like 2 hours, finding something that like for other identities would be like a 5-minute search on like Pornhub. So
Right.
unfortunately. So yeah, check there. You can also always go through like you could try like on Wild Audio or like even like Literotica, I guess, but like I think between the two, like on Wild Audio, you're probably a little bit more likely to have like some success. Literotica is like good luck.
Yeah, you'll really be panning for gold in the sewer outflow.
Yeah, right. That's a great motto for Literotica.
They should put that on the front page.
They should put it on the front page. I'm gonna have to pitch like
that one for free, Literotica.
Yeah, you can have it for free. That's some free trans feminine labor right there.
Oh my goodness. Y'all, this is a really wonderful panel. Thank you so much. Let's creepily like not be invisible to you.
Thank you so much for doing all this admin work and putting it together and making it happen, Gene.
Yeah, seriously, this has been an amazing panel and opportunity, and we talked about so much lovely stuff.
Yeah, this is really special for me.
It was a delight. We were talking on the Instar Discord about how like a friend talked about how somebody was watching and fell over with the Blakean vapors while you were talking about how much your friendship means to one another. I confess some Blakean vapors as well. So,
Aww.
Fucking seeing angels hanging from the tree.
Aww.
We get Gretchen and Anna's links like one last time in the Twitch for people who want more of these excellent speakers.
I'll say too, by the way, that while I'm not really on Twitter these days, I still have my daily.bylines that are probably being posted into the chat. And also definitely check out my adult games on itch.io. As we talked about the trilogy of like queer trans porn, I have one about worshiping a hot trans goddess, and I have another about a cis girl lusting after her trans girl like best friend who turns into a giantess. So very me, you know, very classic branding.
On brand. On brand.
Yeah. Baby Castles, fun fact, over at WordHack, which is like a monthly monthly presentation about like digital art that Todd runs. They actually let me present on the first of those two games, Blood Pact, and it was amazing little thing talking about my weird trans porn games. It was really fun.
Okay. Everyone, thank you so much for coming to this panel. Please check out these books. Please check out Tumblr Porn. It's the book right here. Get it wherever fine books are sold. Or any books, really. But this is okay. Thank you all so much.
Thanks again. Are we still on Twitch?
Thanks so much, everyone. Gonna sign off the stream here, but give it up in your homes. Get some claps going for Instar Books, Gene and Justin, and for Anna Valens and Gretchen, our wonderful panelists this evening. Go get yourself a copy of Tumblr Porn by Anna Valens. Really excellent book. If you enjoyed this kind of panel and book launch, this is one of many types of events you can catch here on the Baby Castles Twitch channel. Maybe throw us a follow or a subscribe, or check out baby.castles.com where you can see some other things we do. That's babycastles.com with a baby and a castles and a com. Alrighty, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for joining us tonight, everybody. See you later.
Good night, gang.